Another speaker is here, and we're going to hear from a very good friend of mine. He is a photojournalist, an instructor. He is also an activist, and he has a lot of great things to tell you. So our keynote speaker today is award-winning photojournalist, filmmaker, educator, and president of the online magazine Vision Project. For nearly 5 decades, Mr. Falco has worked on the front lines of global storytelling. His assignments have taken him across more than 35 countries. His work appears in Time, Newsweek, National Geographic, New York Times, and many others. He's the author of several books and the director of multiple acclaimed documentaries focusing on public health, human rights, and social justice. My favorite thing he's ever done is snuck into Ground Zero, and you can go see his amazing photography of that cataclysm. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor and friend Rick Falco.
Read my sign.
Love, not hate.
Makes us great.
Actually, when Greg asked me to come and speak, I spent a good deal of time just thinking about what this should be about. And I want to actually start this with a question, because I think what we've discovered, particularly in the last decade, is the way we get information is different. And my question to you is, where do you get it and how do you get it? Because if we look at it, it is the public who drives the wheels of our democracy. And without that information to make the decisions in our lives, we're at the mercy of whoever is creating that content. Now, this is why I think media literacy is really an essential component of our educational process. And I think it is a necessary thing that has to start at a very, very young age. Now, to me, journalism has always been the first draft of history. And if we look at how that works, think of how history is brought together. It's usually individuals like myself and others who are there on the scenes, gathering content, gathering information, bringing it together so maybe they or an academic can put that all together and create history. But it must be established and founded on truth. That's the issue we feel today in terms of the polarization of our news and what has happened. Okay, I say to my classes all the time, you know, what does a dictator do when he takes over a country? And I'll ask you, what does a dictator do? All right, the first thing, I'm going to control the media. Why am I going to control the media? Right? That is the way we gather information, the way we analyze it, make decisions in our life. It's going to determine who we are and where we go. And I think the more we think about it, because the technology has changed. You know, when I was growing up, you know, you had the evening news and the newspaper. That is not a way most people get information, right? We have the internet, we have cable news, we have all kinds of ways in which people go. To my chagrin, most of my students get their information on their phone by an app. An app. How can you get enough information? Now, what we're seeing now also, it's been going on for some time, but I've never seen it at this level. We have what? The word fake news, which we've heard over and over again. And it's this, what? Villainization of this established part of our democracy that we need to continue to understand and grow. So, I mean, look, we're seeing it in so many ways. Right? They're closing the outlets of news agencies. Voice of America is no more, right? They're trying to stop the fund of PBS and NPR, right? They are constantly attacking organizations that what? Disagree with what they want people to hear. And then you take that and combine it with the polarization of news, where it's no longer major institutions that are supposedly news. And I will use Fox as the main culprit here. okay? But think of it, the majority of people get their information from Fox in this country, okay? Now that is the truth, okay? But where do we go? Where do we go? Now, we also see attacks in a different way, which, quite honestly, I've never seen in this country. I don't know if you know, but in Marion County in Kansas, the police raided their office, confiscated their computers, confiscated all the documents. And the reason why they did it is because they were doing a story on a businessman and the sheriff that they didn't want that information out. That has not happened before here, okay? Again, now what happened is it went through the courts and it was thrown out. But we see it on another level. I don't know if most of you know, but just this week, CBS agreed to a $16 million gift to the Trump administration. And I want to explain why that happened. If you don't know anything about it, Trump decided to sue CBS for $20 billion for supposedly editing in an interview, for the election. Every lawyer knew that they could not possibly win that. It was bogus. It was just ridiculous. But what happened? We had an individual who was on the board and a major partner in CBS who at that point wanted to sell everything so she can create a merger between Sky and Paramount. Okay, and they needed to get the administration's clearance in order to do that. So now corporate takeover is another thing that is happening that was always there, but not to the level I've seen it today. Before that, I've worked for every major magazine, and the business part was always kept separate from the editorial part, because the integrity of the magazine has to be founded on facts, not propaganda, not hearsay. And I think these are the things that we're seeing happen, which are changing the way you get your information. Okay, the other thing that they're doing is they are inundating you constantly with another new thing, pounding you with information to such a point that you can't absorb it all. You can't assimilate it. And they know that this is a way to create confusion, right? Disorientation. It's overwhelming. And what does it do? It makes the population numb. Numb to the point where you turn off, you shut off, you stop listening, you stop looking, okay? But if that happens, where do we go? Where do we go from there? We add that to the polarization of what we have. We have now organizations that are putting out information that I'm not sure are vetted to the level that a journalist needs to bring it to. I think what we've found in this country is it's no longer political differences, it's cultural differences. It's no longer I'm a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative. It's a matter of how we perceive our world and how we decide to make decisions about it. And those decisions are going to be based on where you get your information. You know, I do a thing in my class focusing on this presentation. It's about what goes on in the Ukraine. And I've collected at this point about 500 images, and I've followed it right from the beginning. And I've watched my students, because I show photographs that, quite honestly, I find very few people see. They get, their little soundbite or, information from this source or that source, which usually is not in any way in depth, is not in any way vetted, right? We can all go online. I mean, too many people get their information from an app. The entire country of Myanmar uses Facebook as their news gathering service. Think of that. Okay, so how do we deal with that? How do we deal with this whole institutionalization of technology that is now the way we find out, the way we do things? Now, the second thing a dictator is going to do, and we're seeing it again beyond what I ever imagined, the attack on education. Okay? What do we see going on, right? They're withholding $7 billion in funding for education, right? They're going after school curriculums. They're going after anything that's DEI, right? Books in libraries. This goes on and on. Look, the attack on Harvard, the attack on Columbia. Harvard can afford to do this. But you know what shivers it sends down the spines of every other smaller institution across the country? And we've seen them make changes because of that fear, because they don't want to lose the funding, okay? We see things where, you know, what? We saw the president of Virginia resigned, not because he didn't believe in what he did, but he felt that if he fought it in the courts, it would cost the institution more in money to defend themselves than it would if he just stepped away. Now, these intimidations are every day. We see it constantly. Suing schools, you know, suing law firms who protect civil rights, right? Making deals where, okay, you're going to do this for the administration, but you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, right? This whole concept is against everything our Constitution gave us and what it represents. I think one of the most interesting things, and I don't know if you know, Greg and I teach at Sacred Heart University. And one of the board members on Sacred Heart is Linda McMahon, who has become, what, the Secretary of Education, who is now trying to dismantle the education. I mean, I can only laugh without wanting to cry at this point. But here's where we are and where we've come to. I want to go back to now, what is a journalist? What do we do? What do we do out there? We're gatherers, right? We're gatherers. We're gatherers of information. We're gatherers of what we witness and see and bring it to a place where it can be analyzed and vetted and put together so that you, the public, which can't get access to that, has a source of finding out, of learning, because it's about that learning process, you know, and we need to think because it's got to be personal at this point, all right? I think now more than ever, we have a responsibility to dig beyond the first 2 pages of Google to find out what's going on. And if we don't do that, then we're at the control of those who are going to be out there giving us the information, okay? If we look at what Putin did when he first entered the Ukraine, what did he do? All outside media was shut down, right? People were getting only what he wanted them to hear, okay? This is the way every totalitarian dictatorship functions, okay? So when you're out there, I understand you need to talk to people, you know, about what you feel and believe in, but ask them, where are you getting your information? Who's telling you about this? What are the tools that you use? Because it's about the technology, and the technology is dictating how we learn, okay? Again, some of us who are older maybe had a different way of gathering that content, but that technological world is here, okay? And I can tell you on the level of students, that's the only way they get their information. And to my chagrin, again, is the level of attention paid to it, particularly in America, is very discouraging to me. And I don't mean to sound like a downer, but it's a thing I've watched because I've taught at a number of universities over and over again, okay? The fact that, I can take an app and in 30 seconds find out what went on in the world, I don't know how you make a decision about anything. But this is our world. So in addition, again, I'm going to reinforce what I said. It's not just about screaming, hands off our truth, or all of those very important things. But when you have conversations with people, where are you getting your information from? What are the sources? Are they vetted? I get up in the morning, first thing I do is I make a 16-ounce cup of coffee, and I sit in front of my computer, and I go through about 7 news organizations. Okay, I realize no one's going to do that. I get it, okay? But again, I want to look and see. And I want to see as much of what Fox News is saying as well as what MSNBC is saying or NPR or the rest, okay? But this is important. Your conversations about the where is as important as bringing to their attention our healthcare is in jeopardy. And I really can't stress that enough. Right? Because what? Information is power. Right? If I control information, I can manipulate, control. Right? That's in my hand. Okay? Look at World War II. You had the basic beginnings of technology, the radio, the use of posters. The Nazis used it to such an incredibly excellent point that they changed their whole society in a relatively short amount of years, while hiding all of their intentions. I think we're seeing that now. And again, your voice must be heard. And you can't just say, I believe this, without being able to back it up with facts. The other thing we have to deal with, which is a component that a lot of people are not thinking about, which is here, it's here to stay, and it will be the next revolution of technology, and that is AI. AI is here. Everyone is using it. Everyone will continue to use it. In the hands of people that use it as a means of putting out information and control, it is a powerful tool. Okay, so these are the things that I thought were important to bring here to just open up about. And maybe when you go home, think about those things too. Because an informed public is the only way our democracy functions. It must be a participatory democracy, but it must be a democracy that is based on the truth. Thank you.